Hi, I'm Magical. So, I have been on a heck of a spiritual journey, and I'm starting to get really good at figuring out the difference between my intuition and my thoughts. And I'm starting to get really good at recognizing signs and recognizing when something isn't a sign. And, you know, there's a difference between something being a sign and something just being an indicator of where your vibration is in that moment. But I'm just getting more intuitive. I don't know what else to tell you. That's pretty much what's happening. And I'm getting called to do all these different things. And the number 33 is stalking me. Sometimes certain numbers stalk me. Like, you know, I see aligned numbers fairly often. Like, I see 111, 222, 333, 444, 555, 666. I think 666 is actually a good omen for me personally. But I think that if you think that 666 is a bad omen, then it's probably a bad omen for you. But for me, the number 666 is a good sign. I have my own personal meanings for numbers. And basically, whatever you believe about a number is what that number means for you. So, like, for me, 13 and the number 23 are bad omens. I try to avoid doing anything when it's whatever 13 o'clock or whenever 23 o'clock. I try not to choose things that have those numbers. There's nothing, I've never really had a super bad experience with those numbers. I just don't like those numbers. So I avoid those numbers, and because I avoid those numbers, I've never really had a super bad experience with those numbers. But you know, I like seeing 888 a lot, and I really love seeing 333. 3 is my favorite number. Um and lately I've been seeing the number 33 a lot. I've also been seeing 333. I used to see these numbers on license plates all the time, and it was so fun. You know, I'd just be driving around and I'd see 333 on a license plate, or 111, or 888, or 444, or 555. Um, I don't, I think maybe I saw 666 one time on a license plate. Has anyone else ever experienced this? Seeing these aligned numbers on license plates? Everywhere? Like, I've experienced this a lot in the past year or so. And it's something that a lot of people experience. It just means that you're in the vortex. When you see aligned numbers, it just means you're either in a good mood or you're connected enough to source to have some kind of insight about something. So usually when I see those numbers, I try to think about whatever it was I was thinking about right when I saw the number, or right before I saw that aligned number, like right before I saw 33 or 333. It often kind of tells me something, like some kind of intuitive guidance that I think my spirit guides are trying to tell me, or that my higher self is trying to tell me. about something I was thinking about. There's probably some kind of intuition there that was in my thoughts. And me seeing the number 33 everywhere makes me think I really need to be more creative this month. Seeing the number 33 everywhere makes me think I really need to do more creative projects this month. I've also been called to go to Paris. Like, I've always wanted to go to Paris my whole life. And I was talking about going to Paris with my mom about a year and a half ago. We were supposed to go, I think, a year and a half ago, but my mom changed her mind for no reason. She just put it off. I don't know, I guess. I don't think we even have the money right now to go to Paris, but that's something that I've been called to do. I've been really called to go to Paris. Like, really called to go to Paris. And I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't have the money to get there, but I just believe that eventually I will get the money to get there. And there's something there for me in Paris. I don't know what it is, but it's something important. And I have a feeling that it has to do with inspiring my creative projects that I'm working on. I think I'm being called to go to Paris because Paris is such a creative haven for writers like me and for artists as well. And honestly, ever since college, I've been pretty desperate to get to Paris and London, especially London, but right now I feel like I'm being especially called to go to Paris. And the reason why college is what really made me crave to go to Paris is because in college I took a Paris class. I took a literal Paris class. I took a class on Paris. Like, it was a class that my French teacher and my favorite English teacher, or one of my favorite English teachers, taught. And it was like, we learned about Paris culture, like Parisian culture, and we also read like great works of literature that are set in Paris. And so we learned about the literature, like culture of Paris, and we also learned about all these different artists and people who spent time in Paris and how Paris affected them and their art and their lives. And as we especially, of course, learned a lot about Ernest Hemingway. I already learned a lot about Ernest Hemingway before, but we had like an entire like segment of that class dedicated to Ernest Hemingway alone. We read The Sun Also Rises. I had already read The Sun Also Rises by myself back in high school. I don't even think I had to read it for school. I just read The Sun Also Rises on my own back in high school, like over summer break or something. And I loved it. And, it's not for everyone. A lot of people will say it's boring. And a lot of people in my college class said, oh, it's boring. They just go to bars and drink half the time. And that's true, okay? But, that's kind of a pet peeve of mine when people call certain works of classic literature boring, okay? Charles Dickens is boring because he's too long-winded. He just takes 50 million years describing something instead of getting to the plot. He spends like 10 pages just describing things, and I'm like, okay, get to the plot though. Okay, but Ernest Hemingway, he gets to the plot though, okay? It might seem boring to modern readers. The Sun Also Rises might seem boring to modern readers. And a book especially like The Old Man and the Sea might seem really boring to modern readers. But it's not boring to me because I recognize that he's getting to the plot pretty quickly. It's a really quick read. And it's not that kind of book. It's not a book that's like heavy on, action scenes and, a lot of crazy things happening. It's the kind of book that's more like, just about people. It's just like a character. I like to call movies and books like this that don't have especially like classically interesting plots as like character studies. It's like a character study. Like The Catcher in the Rye. It's a character study. It's just about getting to know the people. And you also have to remember that things were different in the 1920s. Like, so it might not be your cup of tea, okay? Classic books just might not be your cup of tea. But I think classic books like Ernest Hemingway that get to the plot points pretty quickly and, are pretty quick reads, I feel like those books are not boring because they do get to the point of the plot really quickly. But also I recognize that, it's set in the 1920s. So, people back then, they went to a lot of bars and they just hung out and drank and they went out to eat and they just talked. They just hung out and talked. If you watch a movie like Mrs. Parker and the Vicious Circle about Dorothy Parker, the great writer's life, you'll see, that's literally what they do in the movie. Like, it's set in the 1920s. I believe she met, oh my gosh. F. Scott Fitzgerald. I couldn't remember his name. I was like, what? How did I forget his name? I've read The Great Gatsby literally 3 times. So, she met, S. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Fitzgerald. I think she probably met Ernest Hemingway at some point. She met pretty much everyone who was a writer in the 1920s. She was kind of like that bitch, who was like friends with everyone who was somebody in the writer's scene and in New York. And, I'm not sure if she went to Paris. She probably did, but she knew everyone in New York. So if you watch a movie about her life called Mrs. Parker and the Vicious Circle, you'll see they just, they had this round table that they would go to at, I think it was like in a hotel, and they would just sit around and eat dinner and talk, but the talk was so witty. It was so interesting. They were literally, these were some of the greatest writers of the time just getting together at a table and just musing about the culture and the times and their art and stuff. And that, I just think that kind of stuff is really interesting. And that's the kind of book that The Sun Also Rises is. It's just a bunch of people talking about their time, especially their generation, the lost generation, what it was like being, the first generation to experience a war that had so much of a mass, death toll. Like, so many people died in horrific ways. Machine guns were used for the first time in war. So people were not used to that level of violence in a war before the First World War. And the main character, he has a very interesting wound. I can't even say it on this YouTube channel. Like, just read the book. Like, I think it's interesting. It's just a character study, you know, it's just about their relationships with each other and the times and their generation, and it's very biblical. Ernest Hemingway was reading the Bible a lot at the time when he wrote it. The Sun Also Rises is like from the Bible. Like, it's literally a quote from Genesis, I think. And I do read the Bible a little bit. I'm not religious, but I love the Bible. It's written very well. It's a classic. We all kind of know it, you know. So it's just very interesting. And so now I'm like, you know, ever since that class, you know, just spending an entire semester thinking about Paris, and then all the rich girls who had money, they all went on a trip to Paris at the end of the semester, at the end of the class. And I was one of the poor people who didn't have parents who had enough money to send me to Paris. So I had to just like watch them talking about packing and how fun it's gonna be, and you know, planning the trip, and I just wanted to go so bad with everyone. It would have been so fun. I didn't really have any friends in that class though, so I probably would have felt kind of isolated. Maybe it's a good thing I didn't go to Paris for the first time with the class, because I probably would have felt kind of isolated. Everyone in that class was kind of like in a different grade than me. Like, a lot of them were like freshmen and sophomores, and I was a senior. So we didn't really hang out in the same friend groups, and I didn't really know any of them. So I think we probably wouldn't have really gotten along that well. I don't know. I mean, I'm a friendly person and all, but I'm just saying, like, we weren't friends by the time the trip started at the end of the year, so I doubt that we would have really gotten close during a few days in Paris. And, you know, I probably would have felt kind of isolated being there without anyone that I know. Like, that's why I want to go to Paris with, like, my mom or, like, a friend. You know, I don't want to go by myself. I want to, like, go to Paris with someone and have, like, an experience with my friend or with multiple friends. It'd be even better if I could go with two, you know, best friends or my mom, something like that. So I really want to go to Paris. I'm just being called to go there. And Ernest Hemingway called Paris a movable feast. He said that, you know, if you're young and lucky enough to go to Paris, you know, go. Like, it's a movable feast that will stay with you forever. That's what Ernest Hemingway said about Paris. Ernest Hemingway said that Paris is a movable feast that will stay with you for the rest of your life. And Paris had a profound effect on his writing. I think it probably made his writing a lot better. And it's you know, also, I think what really made his writing better was not just the city, but the influences he was under. Because, you know, that's where Gertrude Stein lived, and Gertrude Stein was his mentor. And, you know, every writer should really try to find a good mentor who is a good writer, who knows what they're talking about, as soon as possible. Because, you know, you would think that someone like Ernest Hemingway just had it all figured out. But no, so many writers throughout the history of time have had mentors. So get a mentor if you're a writer. I need to get a mentor, but I don't really know anyone yet. But I really want to try to find a mentor. And so Ernest Hemingway's mentor at the time was Gertrude Stein. I think they later had a really big falling out. Ooh, actually they had a huge falling out. But at the time they were like really close. And so, you know, she was like really amazing. Like, she would have these salons, kind of like how people used to have in the 1700s, and she would have like everyone there. Like, you know, she'd have Picasso there, Matisse, like Hemingway, just like all these amazing writers and artists would get together and just talk about their art and learn from each other, and they were all kind of like influenced by each other, and they would hang out with each other. F. Scott Fitzgerald was there hanging out. He was hanging out with Ernest Hemingway. They were friends, hanging out. They hung out together in Paris. You know, just can you imagine like being in Paris at that time? I don't want to go back in time to the 1920s. I like my time. You know, I like the technology I have now. And there were a lot of problems to that time, and, you know, a lot of depression back then following the war. Like, I'm talking about, like, a lot of people had clinical depression that was undiagnosed back then during the 1920s because of the war. And Ernest Hemingway was one of those people. I think F. Scott Fitzgerald was one of those people. Zelda Fitzgerald was one of those people. Pretty much everyone who was a great writer back then probably had clinical depression that was undiagnosed back then in the 1920s. And it was probably because of the war in some way or another, or, you know, just the fact that there was just so much stuff going on back then. You know, like, women didn't have as many rights, and, you know, there was so much stuff going on, just other than the war. And, you know, you couldn't even drink alcohol. You had to go to Paris just to be able to drink alcohol legally. So, just so many things to be depressed about back then. But it was still a fun time, you know. I mean, there was lots of dancing. And so there were some fun times. But, just, I mean, I think, the reason why Ernest Hemingway's writing probably got so much better from him going to Paris is because he was surrounded by so many artists that, you know, he was under the influence of. So he had all these people that he could talk to and watch how they worked and learn about their writing process, and have all these people to be influenced positively by. And I think it really affected his art positively. So I think that I should go to Paris, but I think that something's going to happen in Paris where I'm going to meet, like, other writers or other creative people and kind of have, like, my own modern day Ernest Hemingway experience of Paris, you know? Or, you know, the experience of Paris that any other writer would have had back then. Because it wasn't just Ernest Hemingway that went to Paris to meet the other writers that were in Paris back then. You know, like I said, F. Scott Fitzgerald went there. So many other writers and artists went to Paris and had basically the same experience of their art getting, like, a lot better from being under the influence of being surrounded by all these people and, you know, talking about their art so much together. I think they all just, like, positively influenced each other, and the energy was, like, so powerful that they were just all under the energy of this, like, creative influence and, you know, just this influence of learning from each other so much. So I think it just, like, made everyone's writing and art just, like, a bunch better. Also, I think the city helped because it's a very beautiful city, but, you know, I really think mostly it's the influence of being surrounded by a bunch of great artists that will improve your writing. Being surrounded by great writers is going to make you be a better writer. You know, if you actually sit down and write, that is. Like, you can't just sit around the artists who are great and then expect to be a great artist but not do any work. Like, you actually have to write, obviously. But, you know, as long as you write a lot, being around great artists, I feel like, makes your writing better, you know? Being around great writers, I think, makes your writing better, as long as you write a lot. So, I feel like I'm going to have that kind of experience in Paris, and, like, I really want to go. I'm being called to go to Paris. I hope I can get the money to go to Paris within the next year. We'll see what happens. I just keep thinking about this idea of a movable feast. I hope Ernest Hemingway did not overhype that. I really hope that that's my experience. If not, I mean, I always kind of feel like everything is going to kind of let me down. In some way or another. So, I feel like it probably won't be that transformative of an experience like how Ernest Hemingway had. I don't think Paris is really going to be a movable feast for me. But maybe it will be. I'll ask the tarot cards. I'll see what happens. I'll see what the cards say. And then obviously, I can have the experience be whatever I choose it to be, based on how much effort I put in to make it be a positive experience. Like, I have to go to Paris and actually try to meet other people who are writers there. I have to actually talk to people. I have to learn the language. Again, I already learned how to speak French, and I don't really know it that well anymore. I learned it in high school and college, but I don't really use it. I need to practice more with my French, and see what happens when I go to Paris someday. I hope it's a movable feast. I hope Ernest Hemingway didn't totally overhype it, and I hope that Paris really is a movable feast for me. So, I don't know how I rambled about Paris so much. I guess I really want to go to Paris. Yeah. You know what movie I really want to watch again? There's this movie called Simon Killer, and I love that movie so much. And it's set in Paris. I want to watch that again so bad right now. I also want to watch As Above, So Below again right now. That movie is also set in Paris. I love that movie. They go to the catacombs. I want to go to the catacombs in Paris so bad. Oh my gosh. I want to go on a ghost tour in the catacombs. I think I might hire a guide or something and go to the catacombs. It's kind of a risk to hire a guide to go to the catacombs in Paris, though, because sometimes some people hire guides to take them to the catacombs in Paris, and the guide turns out to be a thief. And then they get abandoned by their guide in the middle of the catacombs, and they're totally lost. So you can literally die if you get lost in the Paris catacombs, because it's 6 miles of skulls and bones underneath Paris. So I need to make sure that I go with people who know their way around. I need to make sure that I go with multiple people who know their way around Paris, so that I don't get abandoned in the middle of the catacombs and left for dead. So, on that sad, depressing note, I think I'm gonna end this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe to me if you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button if you like this video. Thank you so much for watching, seriously. I love you guys. Bye!